All right, guys. So we're going to be starting off this lecture, the first lecture. Uh, Again, the course is medical biology and genetics. So in order to truly grasp the content of this course, I feel that it would help to kind of revisit what exactly are we talking about. Again, so at the end of the day, this is a course on molecular biology or cell biology. So when we want to look at and to get a good understanding and study of the cell, I think it makes sense to visit where the cell came from, or evolutionary wise, what is the history of the cell. So if you when we talk about cell, when we talk about the cell, we're talking about the most simple, basic life form. Okay, smallest unit of life is a cell. So, one of the possibilities in terms of where this cell came about, is that, we actually have to think about, all right, fine, life, everything is made up of something. So, where did all the things that made up life come from? And what are the hypothesis about how everything came about to be is what's referred to as the nebular hypothesis. And this essentially says that there was a nebula. Again, nebula is it's a giant cloud of dust and gas that we find in space. And some nebulae, okay, they come from the gas and dust that's thrown out by the explosion from dying stars, such as a supernova. And these rotating nebulas, okay, as they start to rotate, they start to contract because of the force, the gravity. As it contracts, it starts to flatten, and again, it rotates further. So essentially, this is what's happening over here when you look at this. So now we have this enveloping disk of gas and dust that forms these grains, and these grains, they start to collide with one another. As they collide with one another, they start to clump together to form small chunks, and these small chunks are what we call these planetesimals. Okay, so again, what we're having now is we're having these tiny units of matter that, as they're spinning, they start to hit one another, and they start to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and until at some point, they get big enough until they're about approximately a kilometer in diameter. This is what this planetesimal is, and again, these guys will continue to spin and get bigger and bigger. So the terrestrial planets, they build up by multiple collisions and the creation of these planetesimals by, again, force. And what this force? Gravitational attraction. That's what it is. So these outer planets, they grew by gas accretion. And accretion, again, we're talking about growth or increase. This is what this term refers to. Okay, accretion means growth or increase by the gradual accumulation of additional matter, or again, additional layers. So you look at the inner planets are rocky and dense, and this is what we call the terrestrial planets. You can step on them, right? In other words, if you were to ever get there. And then the outer planets that we have over here, these are all gaseous. Okay, these are gaseous planets, or the gas planets. So again, this is the difference between outer planets and the inner planets. The inner planets, again, they're terrestrial, and the outer planets are non-terrestrial. Moving along, it helps to look at the history, okay, the history of life. How old is the planet? How old is the universe? So these are questions that are being asked. And if you were to look at it, they believe that, all of this started, the universe started with the Big Bang, perhaps more than 15 billion years ago, or some people say 16 billion years ago. Some people say 12 billion years ago. So again, depending on who you talk to, you end up coming with the different numbers, anywhere ranging from 12 to perhaps 16. Aside from that, the next thing is, all right, when did Earth form? So it's believed that, again, according to this, that Earth formed about 4.6 billion years ago. Okay, so our universe, again, at its lower estimate, is roughly 3 times older than the Earth is, right? So the universe about 3 times older than the Earth is. So when you look over here, essentially, when did all this start? Here we are all the way up over here. Okay, this is current time, and this is going back about 4.6 billion years ago. All right, so when you look over here, what can we see? Let's try to zoom in over here a little bit and see what we can see over here. All right, so essentially what we're looking at over here is this. Let's further zoom in so it's easier to look at. The oldest known rocks, they came about to be about 3.85 billion years ago. And the first cells that we have fossil record of, okay, the first evidence of cells came about to 3.5 billion years ago. So 3.5 billion years ago is when we first had these very primitive cells. And these cells, we still find them to this day. They're primarily essentially what most bacteria are, the bacteria. And these are referred to as prokaryotic cells, or more simplistically put, the procs. Okay. Next, we have, as time progresses, you go about nearly another 800 million years, and we see about the concentration of oxygen starts to increase, okay, on planet Earth. Then about 1.8 billion years later, 1.8 billion years ago, we have the first modern cells, cells that we are made up of as humans, came to existence. Okay? And these are called eukaryotic cells. And we'll be looking at the differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells later on in the course. Now, or perhaps in this lecture even. So this is when they appear. Then you go about to, this is 1.8 billion years ago, okay, 1.8 billion. But another 600 million years go by, and now we start to see life take off in the oceans of this planet. Soft body invertebrate animals appear. Okay, you can see what this is: a nematode. It's a type of worm. This is a type of a jellyfish. Algae starts to come about. All right, so we start to see this form. As we progress through time, again, more the diversification starts to increase. Animals, they start to become more sophisticated. They start to get bigger also. So this is called this Cambrian era. Okay, and this period over here, the Cambrian period, we have an explosion. There's a sudden increase in the diversity of a lot of animals. Okay, the animal phyla. As we go up into again, we start moving. I'm going to kind of speed through it. About 359 million years ago, during the Devonian period, a lot of fish start to proliferate. These are bony fish. Okay, the first tetrapods and insects also appear. Okay, at the same period during the Devonian. So what are we saying now? Now we're saying that, there's some life that's on the terrestrial as well. In other words, things are starting to move about to the land. Because what happened before, okay, during the Silurian period, okay, during this period over here, Silurian, which is about 444 million to 416 million, is the vascular plants diversified, okay, on Earth. Okay. Between 359 and 299 million years ago, during the Carboniferous period, we end up getting extensive forests that start to develop, that start to expand. Vascular plants start to form. We start to have a record of seed plants that also appear at this point. Also, now we find the reptiles are born, and as on the terrestrial, as well as amphibians are very dominant at this point. As we progress through, now we go to the Permian, between 299 to 251 million years. Reptiles, they start to diversify, and they're starting to take over. Okay. Insects, they start to also diversify and to get more sophisticated. A lot of marine animals, they go extinct, okay, during this point. Now we come to the Triassic, the Jurassic, and the Cretaceous. In other words, the Mesozoic era. And during this point, this is when dinosaurs dominated the planet, okay? Towards the end, as you go about 65 million years ago, okay, this is when the Cretaceous period ended, and the Paleocene started. And during this point, we see the mammals come and they take over. So now you have a major radiation of birds, mammals, and even insects, pollinating insects. Okay, as time progresses, we come to about 2.6 million years ago. This is between 2.6 and 100,000 years ago. This is when the Ice Age appears. Okay, mammals, they continue to radiate during this point, and the genus of Homo first starts to appear about during this period between 2.6 million to 100,000 years ago. That's when the Homo species appears. Homo sapiens first appear. The genus Homo appears. Homo sapiens, sapien, us, we ended up coming, again, last maybe 10,000 years or so, or 20,000 years during this time period. So, and again, the time that we're living in right now, this is called the Holocene, okay?
Moving on to the Hadean, this is the time frame about 4.6 billion years ago. So when you look over here, what are we observing? You can't, you see these huge clouds that are a result of the vapor that's coming from the surface. And when you look at the surface, it's extremely hot. It's molten over here. So again, this is when the planet when it first came together, and it's an extremely hot point. It's extremely volatile conditions that are present. Lots of gases. You can see fire, flames of river that's flowing around, eruptions taking place. This temperature, they're saying it's roughly 1,750 degrees Celsius. So again, it's very, very, very hot. We would not be able to exist. We would die at this temperature. 750 million years later, now we are at about 3.8 billion years ago, 3.85 billion years ago. And this is the Archean Eon. So this is when prokaryotes first appear. So when you look at the picture, notice what you're seeing different. Now you're actually seeing blue skies. You're not seeing these gas clouds anymore. You're starting to see, essentially the planet is, even when you look at this picture here, there's snow over here on these mountains. So the planet has cooled off. We have oceans, we have waters over here. So oceans and continents have formed at this time because the Earth has cooled down. And it's able to support the temperature, the drop in it is able to support oceans and continents to form. We also see banded iron formations taking place around this time. Next, oxygen starts to get filled. When that happens, you get cyanobacteria starts to come about. They appear. And around this time is when we also see we have evidence of the ozone layer forming. So during the Proterozoic, between 2.5 billion years ago to about 542 million years, we see eukaryotes appear at this point. Also, there's evidence of algae, and also we start to see invertebrates. When you look over here in this picture, again, you can see all these different, not only plants that you see in this picture, but also, again, some of these jellyfish-looking like organisms. So this is when they come about. So it takes a very long time to go from these simple prokaryotic cells to evolve into eukaryotic cells, and for these eukaryotic cells to evolve into algae and invertebrates. So the Phanerozoic Eon is divided into 3 different eras. We have the Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and the Cenozoic era. And within the Paleozoic, we start off with the Cambrian explosion. This is when we see the sudden increase of animal diversity taking place in the water. After the Paleozoic, then as we move on into so the other thing during the Paleozoic, we see a huge diversity of the flora on land and terrestrial as well. This is starting to develop. So not only is life increasing and exploding in the water, in the oceans, but also now it's slowly starting to radiate to land. And then as we move into the Mesozoic, this is when it will incorporate the periods starting from oldest, the Triassic, and then Jurassic, and then the Cretaceous. And this is when the dinosaurs are around. So you can see that over here. Then the last part, right, would be the Cenozoic. And then in the Cenozoic, this is when we see a lot of mammals. They take over. The dinosaurs are gone. Remember, dinosaurs they get wiped off at the end of the Cretaceous. After that, over here, they get wiped off here. Then we have our mammals come. Birds start to dominate. Angiosperm, primates come about, and then at the very end, here we are. Humans come. So again, this is happening within the eon would be the Phanerozoic Eon. So in the Phanerozoic Eon, we have all these things going that are taking place. So as I said, again, during the Paleozoic, a lot of things were happening. So we start off with the Cambrian explosion. So that's over here, 542 million years. So it's when animals, they just go crazy, they diversify. Then towards the end, as we move into the Permian, we're starting to see reptiles, amphibians, reptiles that start to appear. And again, these reptiles, they will get bigger, and eventually, as you go into the Mesozoic, this is when we start to see the dinosaurs that appear. So in the Triassic period, the Jurassic period, and then the Cretaceous period. This is the times that dinosaurs roamed. And then once they got wiped out, then we moved into the Cenozoic era. And this is where mammals dominate. Mammals, and to present day, humans, we are mammals as well. So mammals came about, they dominated, and then modern humans, again, we're just over here in a very, very tiny space of time compared to the grand scheme of history, of time in this world.
Now, just to kind of go over what I said earlier, depending on who you talk to, you're going to get you'll hear different things. Modern man appeared about anywhere from 100,000 years ago, as this says, and other places will say maybe 200,000. Some people will say about 300,000. Right. So again, now what one may consider to be modern, that's up to everybody has their own opinion. When we talk about civilizations, though, the oldest civilizations, when you look at Mesopotamia, that we were talking about going back about 3,500 years ago. 3,500, I'm sorry, not 3,500. 3,500 BC. Okay, so again, we're talking about 5,000 years. This is when civilization, the oldest known civilization. So now if we go before then, again, it takes time for civilizations to form. So this is what we have evidence of. So again, this is, when you think about that, you can perhaps say, maybe we displaced the caveman perhaps about, I don't know, maybe more than 5,000 years ago, 6,000, 7,000. Again, some people say 10,000, some might say 20,000. It's debatable, and again, it's gonna go from one person's opinion to another person's opinion. Even when you talk to paleontologists, they have different opinions in terms of what is modern, what is not modern. Are they the same, or is it, are they even considered to be, some of these some of the the genus Homo, when you look at that, uh, where did the transition occur? Some of them won't even agree that they should be Homo. Uh, some of them won't accept that these are actual bipeds. So again, there's a big argument, difference in opinion between them as well. So, it's most of it is it's not. I don't know. Anyways, moving along. Let's go along. I just wanted to get that information out. All right. So why do I have a picture of cars? Essentially, what I'm trying to say is this: all these different type of cars. You've got a subcompact car here, then there's a compact car here, there's a sports car here, there's an SUV, there's a van. All these different type of cars, they all have different purposes. This is to be economical and very good for single people, or a very young couple without children living in the city. And this is, again, regardless if you're living in the city or not, you want a little bit more room. It's a practical car for a family of 3, for example. Now, if you're doing a lot of work, you're transporting things, then you need something that can transport goods. And this van seems to do a pretty good job. You just want to have fun, go out, relax, speed. You don't care about if you have room for somebody else or not. And then this sports car is good. Usually they seat 2 people, but anyways. Moving along, then you end up with an SUV. If you have a family, perhaps 2, 4 children, you want to travel comfortably, you want to feel a little bit more safer, then this would be a better option. So they all have different functions. Okay? Now, what makes each one of these different is what it's made up of, components it's made up of. All right? Some of these cars will have a bigger engine, some will have smaller. The sports car will have these very fancy brakes, and the SUV will have these very big, heavy shock absorbing type of shock absorbers. Okay, the sports car won't have it. It's going to be much more stiff. Why? Because you don't take a sports car off road. Sports cars are meant to be driven on nice, smooth tracks. They're not meant to go over potholes or bumps and whatnot. So different cars, they have different components. So when you look at our body also has different components. Our body is made up of different things as well. And different type of cells, they're going to have a different combination of different components. So if you kind of, again, when you go back, and this should be a pretty basic overview of the components of life and what are the building blocks of matter. And in humans, again, at the very base level, the smallest unit of matter that we have in our body are atoms. Okay, atoms, they come together to form the molecules. Okay, so 2 or more atoms, they end up, when they come together and they connect with one another and they start to interact with one another, they end up forming molecules. Now we take a handful of molecules and something happens. An organism comes to life. Again, we call that the smallest unit of matter that is alive is a cell. And we have many, many, many types of cells. There's over 200 types of cells in the human body. When 2 or more of these different types of cells, they start to interact with one another, they end up forming tissue. We have 4 general types of tissue in the human body. We have we have muscle tissue, we have nervous tissue, we have connective tissue, and epithelial tissue. So when each one of these 4 different types of tissues start to interact with one another, they end up forming organs. And we have many different types of organs. And when these organs, they start to interact with one another, they end up forming organ systems. And you take the sum of everything, this is what we end up with, is called a organism. I'm not going to go over this now because we're going to come back. We're going to be looking at the cell, we're going to be looking at the cell membrane, and we're going to be looking at the organelles. So essentially, again, when you talk about what a cell is, a cell consists of, again, as I said earlier, it's the smallest unit of life. And this life matter, it's enclosed by a membrane. This is what it's protecting it. This is what keeps it all together. And what it's keeping together are the water content of it and all the tools that allow that cell to function, which are called organelles. Again, if you look at this term, the suffix ELLE means small, and organ means tools, so small tools. That's what literally they translate into. So again, the cell, as I said before, the cell is a fundamental structure and functional unit of all organisms. Robert Hooke, back in 1665, he was an English British scientist. He observed, again, these what he described as honeycomb-like structures, okay, and he called it the cell. Then it wasn't later until Anton von Leeuwenhoek, back in 1667, he first described a living cell. So Hooke, he looked at dead cells. Leeuwenhoek, he described the first living cell. And then it wasn't until 1833 that Robert Brown ended up discovering the nucleus. Now, Matthias Schleiden, back in 1838, he's a German botanist, along with Theodor Schwann, who's a British zoologist. They proposed the cell theory. Okay, and what do they say? All cells, they come from the division of pre-existing cells. This is what they say. So the cells that don't just come out of nothing. They need to come from something, and that something happens to be another cell. They said that the cells are the smallest unit that perform all the physiological functions of an organism, and that each cell maintains homeostasis at the cellular level. This is what they propose to be as the cell theory. And again, when we look at the two different divisions of cells, as I said before, there's prokaryotes and then we have the eukaryotes. These are the very, very primitive cells. This is just bacteria. When you look at their DNA, it's just a single circular genetic material that they have. They do not have a nucleus. They don't have an organ, a membrane-lined, a membrane-protected enclosure to protect that genetic information, right? When you look at eukaryotes, on the other hand, eukaryotes, they're plants and animals cells, okay? This is where we find them, euks and proks, all right? And in eukaryotes, they have a membrane-enclosed nucleus. Their genetic material is enclosed within a membrane-contained structure, which you call that nucleus. A bit of an introduction. So when you see this term cyte, we're talking about cells. When you're talking about red blood cell, white blood cells, erythrocytes, leukocytes, lymphocytes, these are cells of the lymph system, monocytes, another type of white blood cell. You're talking about bone cells, osteocytes. So anytime you see this suffix cell, we're talking about a cell. Moving along, cells, they come in different type of shapes, different sizes, and different numbers. Some organisms, they're just made up of one cell. We call that unicellular organisms, while other organisms, such as humans, are multicellular. We have lots and lots of cells that make us. We have trillions of cells that make us up. Again, the size of the cell, the shape of the cell, all that, it's going to vary from one type to the other. So some shapes, they could be described as being as a parenchyma. Again, the cellular tissue, typically it's soft and succulent. Chiefly, we find this in the softer parts of leaves, the pulp of fruits, and the bark of and the pith of stems. This is parenchyma. Sclerenchyma, on the other hand, this is a strengthening tissue that we have in plants, and it's formed from the cells that have a thick lignified walls. If you look at nerve cells are long, they're branched. And again, their job is to conduct nerve impulses. Whereas a red blood cell, they're biconcave, and their job is to transport oxygen and carbon dioxide, blood gases. Muscle cells, on the other hand, they have a very different shape in that they're cylindrical. And, their job is to contract. They move different parts of the body, whether it be bone or skin for that matter. So again, you can see different cells, different shapes, from a red blood cell to a nerve cell. They all have different shapes. Again, their function is different. So shape and function, they always go together. Same thing, we talked about size. Size, it varies from a few microns all the way to a few centimeters perhaps. The pleuropneumonia-like organism, PPLO, this is the smallest living cell that we are aware of. The largest living cell is an ostrich egg. Okay, that's 180 millimeters. So it's huge. Bacteria, you know, we find them on the order of 0.5 to 2.5 micrometers. Sclerenchyma fibers, they could be up to 60 centimeters in length. So as I said before, structure and function, they're always together. Okay, the structure of a cell is going to define its function. Okay. Now, one thing that I will say is that the cell has this non-living outer layer that we call the cell wall, and we only find this in plant cells. Below that cell wall is what we have, the cell membrane. Okay, so cell membranes, it encloses a protoplasm, and the protoplasm has a semi-fluid matrix that we call the cytoplasm, and you know, we'll have a large membrane-bound structure that we call this the nucleus, and so cytoplasm has actually has many membrane-bound organelles, like the endoplasmic reticulum is a membrane-bound organelle, the Golgi bodies, mitochondria, vacuoles, plastids, these are all membrane-bound. In addition to that, they also have non-membrane-bound structures like ribosomes and centromeres. In addition to that, cytoplasm without cell organelles are called we call it the cytosol. Okay, the part of the cytoplasm without the organelles, that's the cytosol. In other words, that's the fluid, the matrix that it's floating in. Now you look over here. Essentially, we're looking at a plant cell versus animal cell. Again, there's a lot of similarity, but there's also differences in terms of cell wall and then, you know, the cell membrane, whereas the cell membrane is only found in the animal cell and we don't have a cell wall. And also some of the organelles will be different as well what is found in plants versus what is not found in animal cells.
Moving along with prokaryotes and eukaryotes, the major difference to see between them is that prokaryotes, these are the older cells. Eukaryotes, these are the more modern cells. Prokaryotes always have a cell wall, whereas in eukaryotes, you may not always find it. In plants, for example, we will find a cell wall that's present over there. In eukaryotes, you'll see a nuclear envelope, whereas you will not have that in prokaryote. Prokaryotes, they don't have membrane-bound organelles, whereas in eukaryotes, they have a membrane-bound organelle. Prokaryotes, these are single-cell organisms that end up coming together to form more complex organisms. And in eukaryotes, these cells, they do come together to form more complex organisms or structures. They both contain DNA as a genetic material. They both have ribosomes, and their metabolism, it is similar, somewhat similar. Moving along to words, again, when you see the suffix blast, it means immature. So when you look at the word erythroblast, this is an immature red blood cell. Osteoblast, immature bone cell. Monoblast, immature monocyte. And hemocytoblast, this is an immature blood cell.